Amen. Well, again, I want to welcome you, and we're starting the new series today, Issues 2016, and during this 4-week series, we're talking about 4 of the most controversial, emotionally charged issues that we face as a country. And the cliche, it goes without saying, right? Doesn't it really go without saying now that we live in a really divided, polarized time? Oh my word, right? And it just keeps descending into more base talk and name calling and the verbal bombs, and so we live in an incredibly polarized time. And for those who are politically active, you do have strong opinions. You do know who you're voting for and why. One of the big challenges, as we prayed, is being pulled farther and farther out to the extremes. Not that it's wrong to have an opinion. There are people out here, maybe they're right. But if we're pulled out so far that we can no longer even have a dialogue with people in the middle or with people who disagree with us, well, in democracy, nothing changes. Are you with me? In order for us to move forward as a society, there has to be some conversation. And we haven't had much. We've had less and less and less over the past few years. There has to be some kind of meeting of the minds. There has to be some kind of compromise, which is a dirty word to a lot of people. But there needs to be some kind of civility in our civics in order for us to move forward as a country. And perhaps one of the greatest needs we have right now is the need for kindness. A friend of mine posted this just sweet picture on Facebook. Even for Facebook, I mean, that's pretty sappy. But when I saw that, I see all the kitten pictures and maybe, it's great. But I saw that picture, I thought, oh, this vulnerable little creature. And I just love it. It's so powerful. You will never regret being kind. Think about that in life. I mean, yeah, there are times in life when you can be a doormat and you regret that. But think, if you approach life with kindness, and you know what, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to ratchet down the tension. I'm going to cool down the rhetoric. And I'm going to approach life and other people with kindness. Doesn't it kind of seem like I don't think I'll ever regret that. I think if I live my life like that, I think at the end I'll be pretty satisfied with that. And perhaps right now we have no greater need in our society than being kind. Doesn't that seem like it would move us forward in a lot of ways? Just simple kindness. And so some people wonder, why would you talk about super turbocharged political issues in church? Why would you do that? Well, first of all, we're not going to tell you how to vote. This church, I don't know what the demographics are. I know anecdotally, there are people in this church that are going to vote for Hillary. There are people in this church that are going to vote for Trump. Did I just say something bad? Right? Like, that's the truth. There are people of all political persuasions. You're sitting in a church service right now. You might be sitting next to somebody who's going to vote for the opposite candidate. It's true. Man, it got really quiet in here, didn't it? Like, were you serious? No. And so, can we, as a community that wants to be a Jesus-inspired community, right, and love your neighbor stuff, can we do that? As we talk about supercharged political issues, knowing there are people who disagree with us. And if we can't, then what exactly is our faith for? If we can't talk about these things in a kind way, even if you disagree with what I say, I'm okay with that. Are you okay if you disagree with the pastor? There are a lot of folks who are not okay if they disagree with the pastor, by the way. I'm okay if you disagree with me. You can't really fire me at this point. You know what I mean? Think about it. No, but, oh boy, no. And so, can we model civility and kindness? But there's more to it than that. It goes deeper. There's this idea in American Christianity that you can't talk about the issues facing the here and now. Have you ever thought about it this way before? A lot of American Christianity, how I was raised, how many of you were raised, is Christianity is about where you go when you die. Anybody experience that? And a personal relationship with Jesus Christ means you get to go to heaven. So I'm going to be saved. I'm going to pray the sinner's prayer. Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross saves me from my sin so that I can go to heaven someday. There are lots of good things about that, but it's about somewhere else at some other time. That's a probably the most popular version of Christianity in America. It comes from the South in the mid-1800s. It's Southern evangelicalism, that I can be saved and I'll go to heaven when I die, and that's what the preachers talk about, and that's what the Bible studies are all about, and that got popularized to the rest of the country in the 20th century. What was going on in the South in the mid-1800s? That, you guys are getting ahead. Geez, I was trying to build the slavery, right? It's rhetoric, you guys. Come on, go with me. No, right? So slave owners in the South, in the mid-1800s, in an incredibly churched part of the country, were putting pressure on people of faith that you don't talk about what's going on in the here and now. Why would they do that? For obvious reasons. Talk about why we can go to heaven someday when we die. Make it about some other place at some other time. Because if it's about now, we're in trouble. Because you can't talk about loving your neighbor when you're whipping people, literally, to get them to do more work for you. And so Christianity became about some other place, some other time. I call it the slave master gospel. And so why is it okay for churches to talk about issues like this? Because Jesus talked about issues like this. Because the prophets, the ancient prophets, talk about issues like this. There's almost no subject that the Bible talks about more than societal justice. So it's obvious that we would. It's not so obvious if you're from the slave master gospel tradition that's so popular in American Christianity. You know, in contrast with the Lord's Prayer we just prayed, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? Jesus says, hey, pray that heaven will come to earth. And then, of course, you live that way. It's the total opposite of the slave master gospel. So that's what would motivate us to talk about these issues. And today we're talking about wealth inequality. And I would suggest that wealth inequality is perhaps the main reason for where we are right now politically in this presidential election season. There are a large number of people who feel left behind by the United States of America. And they're not able to make the living that they used to be able to make. And they know that opportunities for their children are slipping away. And when somebody comes along and promises them things, or blames somebody, they're very susceptible to that. We all are, because of their own pain connected to this issue of wealth inequality. The jobs just aren't there the way they used to be. And so the American dream is that if you work really hard, you can have a rags to riches story. You can go from poor to rich. You can set your children up and make a better future for them. You can change your family tree. You know, migrating here from another country, maybe you didn't have those opportunities. You can have those opportunities here, and I think that's still true relative to much of the world. But so many people feel like the American dream is slipping away. Not only has the gap widened between the rich and the poor, it's widened between the rich and the middle class over the past 30 to 40 years. Some statistics. The average class of 2016 college graduate will graduate with $37,172 in student loan debt. Everybody gasp, right? That's how you start your life now in the United States of America. And these are people that have opportunity, right? This is what opportunity looks like. Well, you have to pay dearly to have that opportunity. As of 2016, the average CEO is paid 335 times more than the average worker. That's up 6% in the past few years. It's going up. The top 1/10 of 1%, so we talk about the 99% and the 1%ers, right? The top 1/10 of 1% in the United States owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Everybody get that? See, those are statistics that start to mess with our brains. So we're not 1%, 1/10 of 1% own almost as much as the bottom 90%. We're going to watch a video here in a moment that some of you have probably seen that's going to illustrate this, and if you've already seen it, watch it 10 more times. We all need to. 15% of Americans live in poverty. About 20% of babies in the land of opportunity are born into poverty. About 1 in 5 children born in the United States is born into poverty. The poverty level for a family of 4 is $23,000. Family of 4, 23 grand a year. Almost half of the babies born in the United States are born into poverty or close to it. I feel like these are moments where I just need to speak more slowly. For all of us, not for me too, to let it sink into my brain. I need to hear this. Nearly half of the babies born in the United States of America are either born into poverty or close to it. I mean, you feel like we just have to be quiet for a moment? And then there have been studies about the effect of poverty on a baby's brain. There was a study that said, last year, it said it's worse for a baby to be born into poverty than it is for a baby to be born to a mom who smokes crack. It's actually more damaging to the brain. Isn't that shocking? Children who grow up in poverty are much more likely to be hospitalized, much more likely to do less well in school, incarceration rates. Poverty is a horrible, horrible beast. A couple more statistics that are just getting worse, to be honest with you. Here's what happens when we compare wealth in the United States according to race and ethnicity. The wealth gap between white and black families nearly tripled from 1984 to 2009. So it's probably tough for you to see on the screen. The top are Latino families in the United States, middle, black families in the United States, bottom, white families in the United States. I mean, what more needs to be said? Here in the land of the free, there's more that's exacerbating this problem. We incarcerate more people than any other country on earth. We have for-profit prisons as well. And for-profit prisons, it seems, incarcerate ethnic minorities even more than public prisons do, than state-run prisons. And so the U.S. Department of Justice released an article in 2013 entitled Prisoners in 2013. In 2013, non-Hispanic blacks, 37%, comprised the largest portion of male inmates under state or federal jurisdiction. 37% of inmates are black in the United States, about 13% of the population. Compared to non-Hispanic whites, 32%, and Hispanics, 22%. However, the imprisonment rate for black females was twice the rate of white females. So if an alien from another planet landed in Arizona, that alien statistically would look at our society and the prison population and the wealth gap and say, it appears that you were in the business of locking ethnic minorities in cages. And laws are written in such a way that they disproportionately incarcerate the poor. There's been a lot of talk about drug laws, right, that disproportionately cause the poor to be incarcerated. And I want to ask you, and this is not marijuana, medicinal marijuana can be a wonderful thing. I'm speaking my opinion, right? I don't want to see a bunch of young people who are healthy using marijuana all the time. It's not good for their brains. And at the same time, let me ask you a question. What do you think is more harmful to society? Marijuana use or 25% interest rates? Or marijuana use or 400% interest rates? And think about which will get you locked up. Right? A person can charge 25% interest, can market that debt to college students, can market that card to the poor, call it the Freedom Card, right? And charge exorbitant interest rates, and it's completely legal. Which is more harmful to society? Of course, education is a great way out of poverty. We already looked at that statistic. 2016 college graduate graduates with $37,000 in debt and is also $3,000 in consumer debt and credit card debt. So the average college graduate in the United States, in the land of opportunity, graduates with over $40,000 in debt right now. Do we need to talk about healthcare expenses in the United States? And how it can be difficult to get ahead when healthcare costs so much. And so some of these laws that are set up, who do they hurt the most? The people who can afford it the least. The laws are written, it appears, in such a way that the people who are disadvantaged the most are the people who need the most help. One more factoid before we move on. A couple of years ago, Princeton University released a study finding that in their view, the United States is no longer a democracy. They call it an oligarchy, which is ruled by the few. Ruled by the few who have the resources to buy votes. And the money to make their desired laws the law of the land. If that's the case, it's no wonder then that laws disproportionately incarcerate the poor. All right, there are some, before we move on to some scripture passages, I want to just tell a little story real quick and address something. There are some who would say, well, you know, that spike in that 1% and top 1/10 of 1% spike that went off the screen, hey, those people worked hard. They earned it. They deserve it. Great. I'm all for hard work. I believe in small business. I believe in the American dream. Great, go for it. If you can make a living honestly, go for it. If you can become wealthy honestly, go for it. There's this strange phenomenon that happens when middle-class people will get angry and agitated at a video like that. And they begin defending the top 1/10 of 1%. There's something that happens. A person maybe makes 50 grand a year, 100 grand a year, which is a very nice living, and they'll see a video like that and they'll get ticked. Have you had this experience? A guy who makes maybe $75,000 a year will be like, that top 1/10 of 1%, that gabillionaire, he's earned every penny, you get off his back and you leave him alone, right? It's like they're coming to the defense of this poor, billionaire, right? Have you seen this? I did some genealogy work in my master's degree because it was assigned, but I was also interested. And I discovered that one of my relatives was a man named Amos who lived in North Carolina and Virginia in the time of the Civil War. He fought for the Confederacy. And he was listed in his occupation as a laborer. So what does that mean? He's an unskilled laborer. He did grunt work. And he fought in the Civil War to maintain the South's ability to own people. Right? So he fought in the battle to keep slaves slaves. To tell you, you already know this, but just to show you the true depths of my nerdism, I'm going to share with you an article that I read. And this article is entitled Social Divisions in Antebellum, North Carolina. Somebody asked you after church, what do you talk about in church today? Social divisions in Antebellum, North Carolina, guys, is what the pastor wanted to talk about. So antebellum means before the war. We won't spend long on this. So before the Civil War in North Carolina, here's what society looked like in North Carolina. We're going to get to how things kind of work psychologically today, all right, and why you feel like you can't pay your bills when that spike's going off the screen. Here's how it works. The top class in pre-Civil War North Carolina was the gentry, planter class. They were 6% of society. They owned most wealth and slaves and controlled politics. They owned most of the slaves, right? The middle class is only 25%, but they wanted to be the gentry. It's very important. So they sided with the gentry and identified with the gentry. They didn't own nearly as many slaves and didn't have nearly as much money, but they wanted to be in the gentry. 3, farmers and skilled laborers, 30%. They owned their land. They maybe owned a couple of slaves. They sided with the gentry because they aspired to be what? Say it with me. The gentry. And hey, if you own a couple of slaves and you can feed your kids, life's okay, right? Not so bad. So they defended the gentry. Then there were poor whites, my relatives. You know, my 7-month-old son has more teeth than most of my relatives had, right? Illiterate. Laborers, practically slaves themselves, came over on a boat with nothing. Poor whites, 3% tenant farmers, poor laborers, they supported the gentry. Why? They have nothing. Why did they do that? Because at least we're not slaves. At least we're not black slaves. Who actually picked up the guns and did the fighting? My relatives, the people who couldn't read, the people who had very little to fight for. They fought for the gentry, to prop up the gentry. Why? Because at least we're not black slaves. And so this weird psychological phenomenon takes place where people who are basically screwed over in society will defend the people screwing them over because they want to be like them. And they also think, well, at least there's somebody lower than me. Sorry about that. That's what happens when you have ears that stick out and you have a headset mic. And so there's this strange thing that happens when people see a video like that and they defend this system that's wildly skewed. And almost half the kids are born in poverty or near poverty. Well, it's been a long-running narrative in U.S. history. Okay, moving on. There are two words that run throughout the Bible, in English at least, one word in Hebrew. They begin in Genesis and end in Revelation. They're the words justice and righteousness. In Hebrew, it's the word tzedakah. Tzedakah, say it with me, tzedakah. Justice and righteousness. It means doing what is right by everybody. It doesn't mean like somebody commits a crime and justice is you throw them in prison. It means doing what is right, doing what's fair, doing the right thing with everybody's interest in mind. Tzedakah, justice and righteousness, one of the ultimate words in the Jewish faith. Rabbi Shmuley, my buddy Shmuley, who comes here to speak occasionally, tzedakah is like one of his favorite words, right? It's what motivates him to get out of bed in the morning. Tzedakah, justice and righteousness. And so when I was in college, a well-known speaker named Tony Campolo came through conservative evangelical colleges. He was a professor of sociology at Eastern University. He identified with conservative evangelicals, but also ticked them off a lot of times. And so he would come in and talk about social justice issues. And I remember in my conservative Christian chapel, we went to chapel 3 times a week, by the way, in my Christian school back in Ohio. He came through and gave a speech on social justice and poverty. And he would start a speech like this around the country. We didn't know because there was no internet, but so it worked on us. But he said this around the country. He said, I have 3 things I'd like to say today. First, while you were sleeping last night, 30,000 kids died of starvation or diseases related to malnutrition. And then he paused. And then he said, second, most of you don't give a shit. These are people who, like, they've never cussed in their lives. You know what I mean? That tie knot is cinched up as tight as it can possibly be. These are people who carry big, large Bibles with them, you know, and the children, that they raise their kids to be like that. So there's like this gasp. All the air is sucked out of the room. He said that word. Tony, that's a bad word for poop. You don't say that word. And so people are just freaking out, and he lets that hang in the air as long as possible, right before they tear their clothes and bum rush the stage. He says, thirdly, you care more about the fact that I just said shit than you care that 30,000 kids died last night. And they're just cut to the heart. Because, once again, in American evangelicalism, it's about going to heaven and don't cuss, and, you know, right? It's a slave master gospel. And Tony pointed out, tzedakah, justice and righteousness. It means to do what is right. It means when you feed a poor child, you're not doing it because you're a nice person and that you have so much love in your heart. I hope you do. But it actually means you're doing it because it's just the right thing to do. In other words, the child deserves that. Why? Because the child's a human being, just like you. And so giving to the poor or voting for more just laws, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, whatever that looks like in your political philosophy, you're not doing that because you're nice. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. The first occurrence of tzedakah in Genesis 18, it's the first book of the Bible. It's part of God's promise to Abraham. It says, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on the earth will be blessed through him. For I've chosen him so that he will direct his children and household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Tzedakah. Why will the earth be blessed? Because his descendants will practice tzedakah, justice and righteousness. Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, right? That's how we're supposed to live. We're called to bring about justice and righteousness, tzedakah. Here's another example, 1 Kings chapter 10. This is said to King Solomon, who was king over Israel and Judah at the time. The queen of Sheba says this to King Solomon. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. Why was he king? To maintain justice and righteousness. Another word for king is the government, is a monarchy. Are there kings and queens in America? No, we're a government by the people and for the people, correct? We are the government. What's the purpose of government? According to 1 Kings, the purpose of government is to maintain, say it with me, justice and righteousness. Tzedakah. So if you were to consult the scripture, if you're a person of faith, you would say, what's government for? Well, the answer is to maintain justice and righteousness, to maintain tzedakah, to write laws that maintain justice and righteousness. Now, there are people who talk about limited government. That's fine. Everybody wants some government. We like roads that we drove on to get here. we like Social Security. Those are popular things. So we can agree on a lot. But the purpose of government is to maintain justice or righteousness. Justice and righteousness, not one or the other. Justice and righteousness. So regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, you might have a different idea about how that happens. There are Democrats that have their philosophies and Republicans that have their philosophies. But the point of government is to maintain justice and righteousness. Here's Jesus in Matthew chapter 7. And we're going to move on to our guest speaker here in a moment. He says, watch out for false prophets. These are people who are religious people, very religious people. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them, like you recognize a tree by its fruit. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, and a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit. A bad tree cannot bear good fruit. We're all tracking, right? Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. If you plant a lemon tree and it doesn't grow lemons, what do? You cut it down. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Now listen to this, what Jesus says to religious people. We all need to hear this. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. It's not about talk, he says. It's about action. Many will say to me on that day, he's referring to the day of judgment, right? And this, questions and doubts welcome, lots of different ideas. Many will say to me on the day of judgment, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and in your name drive out demons, things they thought were religious, good things to do, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Evildoer is the Hebrew word rashaim, means people who actively oppose justice and righteousness. And a second class of people, people who are indifferent to justice and righteousness. In other words, there are people who do justice and righteousness, and there are people who actively work against it, but there's this middle ground of people who are indifferent. How many of you realize it's really painful to try to straddle a fence? Right? Jesus says the indifferent are also lumped in. Of course, the ancient rabbis said the indifferent are lumped in with the rashaim, and they're all counted as evildoers. Why? Because they didn't actively work for justice and righteousness. That's how important this is to somebody who wants to claim the name of Jesus. For people who are not religious, they may have other reasons for wanting justice and righteousness, but for a person who talks about Jesus, he says this is what it's all about. 3 very quick ways to live justice and righteousness. Number 1, in your own life, you can gain financial peace. If you would like to be more generous with your giving, if you would like to help people who are in need but you can't because you're too in debt, you're too stretched, there are ways to get out of that, to get a hold of your own financial life, to be able to save for your retirement, and to be able to give generously the way you want. We can refer you to financial counselors. There are all kinds of programs out there that can help you get out of debt, but to gain financial freedom for yourself. The second is to give. No, it's not all about just giving to a church, but to give to people who have need. My day job is at a food bank and community center, and you serve there. It's not just about money either. Some of you give time there, and you feed people who are hungry. We serve every month at Feed My Starving Children as a church, and feeding kids around the world who are hungry. Matthew's Crossing is a great food bank here. We're doing Kids Serve, where kids and their parents are going to put together hygiene kits for people who are experiencing homelessness here in a couple of weeks, and some of you are giving hygiene items for that. So there are lots of ways to give. I saw this on, LinkedIn the other day. The NFL has a lot of problems, but one thing they did right was there are kids in Dallas who are so poor, they don't have a bed to sleep in. So the Dallas Cowboys and some other teams invited kids in to the stadium for the night for a sleepover. Isn't that awesome? Set them up with all these awesome beds on the field. You get to sleep in this comfortable bed. You don't have a bed. Kid who doesn't have a bed, sleep on the floor at night. They get to go into Cowboys Stadium and sleep in an amazing bed. Isn't it awesome? And then in the morning when they woke up, they said to the kids, I get all emotional, you can keep the bed. And so they sent all these kids home with their own bed. Isn't that just a Kleenex grabber, right? And so there's a guy in a church I served in several years ago who was a recovering cocaine addict. And I remember him saying to me one time, I don't remember the greater point of the conversation, but I remember him just kind of giving me a one-liner, Ryan, there's nothing that compares to how good I feel when I give and I get involved and I make people's lives better, right? The fulfillment of giving. The third thing is government. To get involved in the political process, because the purpose of the government is to maintain justice and righteousness. So regardless of whatever party you're in, that's fine. Your philosophy is optional, but what's not optional is maintaining justice and righteousness. A political activist named Jim Wallace said one time, well, he gave this illustration that's well known. He said, let's say people are drowning in a river, and a bunch of people out of their compassion see that people are flailing and drowning in the water, and they start pulling people out of the water. And well, that's great. These people are drowning. Pull them out of the water. It's the right thing to do. How long, he said, do we wait until we go upstream and we find out why people are falling into the river? And that's how we can address problems at their root cause. There are often governmental issues. Yes, there are heart issues like racism, absolutely. But there are also government solutions to that. So we're going to wrap up the last few minutes of this with an interview with our special guest. And I went a little long. Surprise, surprise, right? I was trying to cut and give him more time, but we're gonna give him the time he needs. The least controversial thing in America right now for addressing wealth inequality is raising the minimum wage. 75% of Americans believe that the minimum wage should be higher than the federal minimum wage right now, which is $7.25 an hour. You might be in the 25%. If so, that's fine. Okay, you're entitled to be here. That's fine. When 75% of people support something, however, it's no longer controversial. It's just that's most people. And so $7.25 an hour full-time is $15,000 a year. So a person could work full-time and make $15,000 a year. 66% of Americans believe the minimum wage should be at least $10.10 an hour. That's a super majority. That's not that controversial either, frankly. And 59% of Americans support a $12 minimum wage. MIT did a living wage calculator study, and around the country in various cities, they figured out the hourly rate you need to make in order to really make a living in that city. So in San Francisco, it's like $1 million an hour, right, that you need to afford a house. In Maricopa County, in order to really make it, they said the living wage here is $24.09 an hour. And that's 50 grand a year. To really get ahead in Maricopa County, according to MIT, you need to make about 50 grand. A $24 an hour minimum wage, right? So that's a wage gap of, what, 16 bucks between what it is now and what MIT says it needs to be. So our guest speaker today is working on a minimum wage law here in Arizona. And you might vote differently. You're entitled to be here. But I wanted to give him a chance to speak and to talk about why it's so important. I've been talking for a long time, so everybody kind of stretch. Hold your arms up. Just kind of stretch a little bit. Breathe a little bit. Because our guest has some important things to say, and he's being invited by this long-winded pastor to come and talk. So Luke Black works as the East Valley field organizer for Arizona Healthy Working Families. Luke holds an MA in Transformational Leadership from Seattle University and an MS in Justice Studies from Arizona State University. He's called Phoenix home since 2004. So let's give a very warm welcome to Luke Black. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for sitting through all that before he's thinking, can I come up now?
Sure.
Can I come up now?
So, I don't know if this is on. Is this on? Now it's on. All right.
Luke, you've been working in important causes for a long time here in the Valley. Now you're working for a minimum wage law. Tell us what it is you're working on right now. What's the goal?
Perfect. Well, thank you first for the opportunity to come and talk. You know, I am not a person of faith. I don't remember the last time I was actually at a church service. But even for me, it was a pleasure to sit and listen to what you talked about. You know, I find it absolutely fascinating that we're gathered here, right? And for you all, you are gathered here, right, in the name of this person called Jesus Christ. And, you know, I think it's so important that you all as a congregation are tackling some of these issues is because when you go back and you look at the roots of all of the major religions in this world, they are all born in social inequity. They all come out of deep places of social upheaval because of social inequity. Muhammad,
right.
Buddha, Confucius, all of them, Isaiah, are rooted in moments of deep social upheaval. And when you look at Christ, I mean, Christ was born in a time of deep social upheaval. You can't separate Christ from the fact that he was born into the working class. He was born a bastard. You said shit, so I'm following your lead, right? Right? So I was like, did he say shit? I got a license. All right. So, right, you can't separate the fact that Christ was born into a working class family. You can't separate the fact that he was born as a bastard into a patriarchal society. You can't separate the fact that his family became refugees. You can't separate the fact that his country was under a military occupation at the time. The roots of Christianity are about social inequality, and they're about how we as people and you as Christians choose to tackle those issues. You know,
nice.
I'm the field organizer for Prop 206, which is the Arizona Healthy Families Initiative, and I'll give you the basics of that here in a second. But why I think it's so amazing that you all are talking about social inequalities and especially income inequality is because we as a country cannot address any of our inequalities unless we're also willing to tackle how they intersect with income inequality. Whether you're talking about trans queer justice, whether you're talking about Black Lives Matter, whether you're talking about indigenous justice, whether you're talking about immigration, whether you're talking about women's rights, everything intersects with income inequality. And that's why we want to talk about this. That's why we want to do this. I don't even remember the question.
You're doing just fine, actually. I wish I would have cut more, actually. What's the specific proposal?
Sure. So the specifics of the bill or of the initiative, it's Prop 206, Arizona Healthy Working Families. It will do two major things. First, it will raise minimum wage from $8.05 an hour, which is what Arizona's current minimum wage is, to $10 in January, and then incrementally to $12 by 2020. The second thing that it'll do is change Arizona law so that anybody that works at least 20 hours a week will automatically earn paid sick time. Right now in Arizona, there are about 900,000 workers that go to work every day without any guarantee of sick time. Arizona does not require that employers provide sick time, and so if you get sick time, congratulations, you're one of the few. But for 900,000 folks, they go to work having to make a decision whether they're going to go to work sick, if they're going to have to just miss work and possibly lose their job if their kid gets sick. And we want to change that, right? We want to provide that opportunity, and we also want to increase minimum wage.
Nice. What are some of the common objections? I'm familiar with them, and we all are, and maybe they're, questions and doubts welcome. There are different opinions here. What are some of the common objections to raising the minimum wage, and how do you address those?
Sure. So without a doubt, the two biggest objections that we get are, one, it's going to raise prices, and two, it's going to cost people their jobs. Now, we could talk all day long about all of the research that indicates that both of those things aren't true. And we can also talk about the fact that there are about 780,000 people that are going to get a raise as a result of this ballot initiative passing. And we can talk about the fact of what it means if you put all of that buying power in the hands of 780,000 people who are going to take that money and spend it in the economy, which is going to increase sales tax, which is going to increase the tax base, which is going to help us with all of the programs that our government takes care of. And that's a huge boom for all of us, right? It's also a boom for the economy. We can talk about all of those things, right? But what I find spectacularly fascinating, and I mean that in the most, critical way that you would ever use the word fascinating, right, is that those arguments ultimately come down to a decision about whether or not we're going to care about other people, right, and what caring actually looks like, right, because we as a country are deeply engaged right now in undermining the economic stability of people, right? And if you don't think that's the case, go to your grocery store and see how many automated checkout lines there are. Go to a McDonald's right now that is piloting automated checkout, right? We are deeply ingrained in undermining working class folks, but yet we don't ever complain about it until we have, everybody becomes economic experts the moment we start to talk about raising the minimum wage. And we should ask ourselves, what is it about that? Why is it that we immediately forsake caring about one another and all become economic experts as soon as we talk about raising the minimum wage, right? We have a responsibility as people, right? As human beings that live and work and survive together to make sure that we are all taken care of. And for me, that's like at the heart of this bill, right? And so when we talk about those challenges and those issues that folks have, that's ultimately what I get back to.
Yeah. So if folks want to be involved in what you're doing, how can they get involved?
Perfect. So obviously the first thing that would be great is vote yes on this bill, or on this ballot initiative, right? I mean, I have a bend towards it, right? I mean, you all will make your decisions. So it's Prop 206. The second thing is that we need folks to talk about this. You can go to our website, you can go to our Facebook page, you can get informed on this, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors about it. And then the third thing is we got to get as many voters informed as possible, and we're always looking for folks that want to volunteer, right? Political campaigns always are looking for folks to come knock on doors, talk to voters. I'm down here in your neighborhoods all the time knocking on doors, and I would love for you to come knock with me. You know, it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be back here, right?
Yeah, I'll be back in the corner.
Where I am too. We're all both in the corner. And at the Info Center, we'd love to talk to you after the service. Can we all thank Luke?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So, once again, I mean, that's a specific proposition. You can vote however you want, right? Once again, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, there are things that are not optional. Will we love? Okay, we can argue about what it looks like to love philosophically, but will we love? And will we maintain justice and righteousness? We can argue about what that looks like, how the government's involved in that, what taxes are like, and what laws. We can argue about those things. But we can't argue about the fact, oh, well, we are called to maintain justice and righteousness.